and all the different inputs that everyone has made. I think most of you will have seen me earlier, so just in case you haven't, my name's Liz. So this session that's coming up is about Housing First for Women, and myself, Avril Pollock and Susan Jack will be providing some bits and pieces of information for you. But we will also be joined by Louisa Steele and Rhiannon Barrow. Both are managers in Westminster. Louisa at a homelessness and housing first project called Standing Together, and Rhiannon, who is a manager at Solace Women's Aid. So we're going to start with Avril, if you could, please.
Hi there. For those who didn't see me earlier, my name is Avril Pollock and I am the Service Coordinator for Glasgow Housing First Legacy Service. Today I'm going to give you some information about research and statistics for women in homelessness. There has been some recent research done specifically for women in homelessness. To date, homelessness has been viewed as being mainly a male experience. However, recent reports and research from the third sector have identified that a higher number of women than previously thought. Homeless Link survey 2013 reported that women make up 26% of the people who accessed homeless services in that year, using approximately 10,000 bed spaces across the UK. From the Scottish Government and Engender, in 2019 to 20, 14,320 women were recorded as living in a homeless household, which is 45% of the homeless population. There is a higher number of female applicants in the under 25 age group, with 28% versus 20% for male. A Safe Home by Crisis has reported that women often rely on informal arrangements, sofa surfing with family, friends, acquaintances, and this can leave them at a higher risk of vulnerability. Research is showing that women are more likely to be hidden homeless, living in squats or rough sleeping in concealed areas, and rough sleeping seems to be on the increase with younger women too. St Mungo's Rebuilding Shattered Lives report that women say they take care of themselves when they're sleeping rough. Safe Home from Crisis reports that over 3/4 of the women that they had spoke to had been exposed to shocking levels of violence and abuse. Over the course of 1 year, 1 in 4 women had been sexually assaulted. Domestic abuse contributed to 33% of women becoming homeless, with 54% of women ending up sleeping rough. In the UK, lone parents with dependent children who have experienced domestic violence represent the bulk of homelessness. Shelter reported in 2018 the average age of death of a homeless woman is 43, 30 years lower than the average age of death of the general population in England and Wales. So I'm sure that was some quite difficult listening to do. Not the best information to give over. So on that note, I'm going to pass over to Liz, who will give you a talk about some of the reasons as to why women are homeless. Thanks.
Thanks, Avril. You're right, that's quite a stark reality, isn't it? That the age 43 being the average age of death of a homeless woman. It's quite significant. So just to reiterate a bit about what Avril said there about the start really of a woman's journey into homelessness is she can often be invisible. Somebody who does not have a safe and a stable home, but could in fact be sofa surfing between friends or family, or in an even worse situation, making themselves extremely vulnerable by living with someone who may have offered them a roof over their head, but at a personal cost. So there are many reasons why women become homeless. Women often have exceptionally complex problems that can contribute to their homelessness. I think it can be recognised probably that a lot of these problems stem from inequality. For example, economic disadvantage caused by lower incomes, inadequate, unaffordable housing, and that's just to name but a few. but also the unfair power dynamic that remains between men and women today in society. Even after all these hundreds and hundreds of years, it's still there. So in turn, all of these circumstances can lead to many things. For example, poverty, violence and abuse, childhood trauma, sexual and emotional exploitation, etc. So often women who have a child or children are under one or more of these situations, then go on to have their child taken into care. This in itself is a hugely significant factor in homelessness, as being someone who was looked after by the local authority is the most prevalent factor in homelessness. So within any group of homeless women, there's a really sad situation, and that you often find that the women, they're grieving for their own lost childhood, but also can be grieving for their own lost children. So although a generalisation, women do tend to be older when they surface in homelessness. And this is because, as I mentioned earlier, they've been able to find other ways to prevent themselves from being roofless. By this time, though, their needs have usually greatly escalated, as they have been left and not dealt with for many years. So it also makes it less likely that these women are going to be able to begin their own journey into recovery and finding a more positive way forward. We also know that many women who are in or use services have been involved in, for example, may have been involved in prostitution and other offending behaviours that can then lead to imprisonment. We know from research that women leaving prison often have nowhere to return to, and this creates another perpetual cycle where they have to enter or re-enter the homelessness system. So on those happy words, I'm going to pass you on to Susan now, who can continue.
Yeah, I'll continue with the cheery information. I'm going to just talk briefly, now that Liz and Avril have given us some background, I'm going to talk about why Housing First is, potentially such a good resource for the women that we are talking about today. Currently, women experiencing homelessness with multiple and enduring support needs have very few specific safe options. We know from research that the number of women in the homelessness population with this background is a significant number. And this in itself should have implications for homelessness strategy and requires a dedicated focus on research and policy development. In Scotland, the 2018 HARSAG and Ending Homelessness Together reports identified women with multiple and enduring support needs as a demographic that required specific resources. However, we need more focused research and analysis of women's experiences. Co-production in the planning and development of services would lead to a better informed gendered provision. Research on women's homelessness, as has been mentioned already, has confirmed the near universal experience of domestic abuse, other forms of gender-based violence, mental health problems, addictions, and contact with the criminal justice system, experiences that homelessness will more than likely have exacerbated. A key difference for women is the presence of both negative and broken relationships with ex-partners who were abusive, and either the absence or fragility of relationships with children. The Threshold Housing Project's Housing First pilot for women in 2017 reported that 79% of the women they were supporting were parents, but none of them had their children living with them at the point of referral. These are devastating experiences of trauma that in the majority of cases will probably never have been supported. Women that have experiences of one form of gender-based violence are very often more likely to other experiences, particularly when they haven't received appropriate support. So when you add in, the likely evidence of mental health problems and addictions, this is clearly a group of women that need and deserve very specific supports. They need supports that are easily accessible and can respond to their needs on trauma and abuse, their relationships with children and stigma and shame. Society, continues to view women as the mother and the homemaker, and homeless women often bear the burden of those expectations and can perceive their situation as a failure. Many domestic abuse refugees are unable to provide support to women with multiple and enduring support needs that are homeless, or certainly have a very limited capacity to do so. So the Housing First principles are entirely suitable for this group of women. Housing First prioritises choice and control for women that have been disempowered and abused by partners and the wider system throughout their lives. Housing First support is intensive, flexible and open-ended. The small caseloads ensure that the support is flexible. A difference again for housing support for women is the need to help women to manage current relationships, ensuring their safety with partners or ex-partners through safety planning and risk management. Helping women to rebuild certain relationships and support to access partner agencies that will help them address their experiences of abuse, addictions and mental health supports. Services must support women to make choices that are right for them at that time and allow them some control in their own lives. We know that Housing First staff excel at building successful, trusting relationships. The provision of intensive support can aid in reducing anxiety, stress and worry, and focusing on the women's strengths. A staff team that have an understanding of the causes and impact of gender-based violence is essential. We're already having feedback from research and evaluations from services that are already providing Housing First support for women, and they are reporting increases in confidence, rebuilding family relationships, improvements in mental health and reduction in alcohol intake. And just before I pass over to the people that are providing that support, just a quote from the Threshold Housing Project pilot for women, Housing First for Women. They always get back to me. A lot of services where they say they will do this, they will do that, you just get passed from pillar to post. But when they say they're doing something, they do it. I've had a really hard life and nothing has ever been seen through, basically. With them, they have. Louisa, thank you very much.
Hello, I'm just going to share my screen so you can see our presentation. There we go. Thank you very much, Susan and Liz and Avril for that intro. We're going to try and not go, I think that's a really fantastic introduction to women's experiences of homelessness and how Housing First works for women. So we're going to tell you a little bit about developing Housing First for women experiencing violence against women and girls in the borough of Westminster in London. So my name's Louisa. I work for an organisation called Standing Together. Standing Together were founded 20 years ago with the ambition to eradicate domestic abuse by transforming the way organisations and individuals think about, prevent and respond to it. We operate in various settings, including health, housing, criminal justice and communities, and we work with a really wide range of partner agencies to ensure a kind of coordinated, collaborative response to domestic abuse and thinking about the response to survivors and perpetrators. So I work on the Housing First and Homelessness Project. We've coordinated this since 2017. We work collaboratively with local authorities, homelessness support services, specialist women's services and a range of other agencies to ensure that women experiencing homelessness, violence against women and girls and other forms of multiple disadvantage have better access to safe accommodation and support that meets their needs. And this Housing First project is a key part of this wider project. I'm going to hand over to Rhiannon to introduce herself.
Hello, my name is Rhiannon Barrow and I'm the Housing First Team Manager at Solace Women's Aid. Solace is the leading provider of services for survivors of violence against women and girls. Based in London, we deliver community-based services, refuge and move-on accommodation, advice lines, training therapeutic services, and many more, including specialist provision for children and young people. We have Housing First projects for women in Westminster and Islington in North London.
Thank you. All right. We go back. So I think we've Liz and Susan and Avril have already covered a lot of this, so I'm going to whiz through this. But obviously, when we're thinking about how women's experiences of homelessness are different to men's, we're thinking about chronically homeless women in Housing First projects. Experience of domestic violence and abuse is near universal among women who become homeless. Which I think has already been covered, women are mothers, and many are likely to have had children removed. I think that statistic from the Threshold Housing First service is really quite shocking, thinking of all those women and every single one of them having had children removed, and the impact of that and how that resonates down the years in terms of trauma cannot be underestimated. I think the guys earlier touched on this, but potentially higher need. So the greatest disadvantage is experienced by those who endure a range of abuse across their lifetime. Over 80% of this group are women. And there is evidence to suggest that due to the patterns of women's homelessness, they're hidden homeless, they're likely to approach services later when they're at crisis point, when things have got really bad. So when we're thinking about the chronically homeless female cohort, it would not be surprising that they are potentially higher need when they get to that point. Also, we know that women are likely to avoid services where men are present. So when we're thinking about when women are rough sleeping and things like that. Okay, so Housing First services need to understand this difference. It's really, really important, and make the necessary operational adjustments. So, for example, around managing relationships, as Susan said, managing domestic abuse, and other forms of violence against women and girls, because we know that chronically homeless women are obviously impacted by domestic abuse, but a wide range of other gendered violence as well. All right, so Housing First principles are obviously key to a fidelity approach to Housing First, and we know they work. But I'm just going to look closely here about how they align with gender and trauma-informed practice. So obviously, people have a right to a home. As we know, there are kind of potentially higher homeless women are higher risk. Everyone should have the right to access safe, stable and affordable housing. We know that particularly for women, when we're thinking about building emotional safety, building resilience, building confidence, that physical safety is absolutely essential. So having a door that locks, having their own space is essential. Flexible support is provided for as long as is needed. Building trusting relationships are absolutely crucial from healing from trauma. I think flexible support is completely key there, that the worker can be there for them when needed, has that time to build that relationship of trust as well. Housing and support are separated, so the offer of housing is unconditional, regardless of which services the woman chooses to engage with. And then again, we're thinking prioritising safety and stability, which is a core need for healing from trauma. Individuals have choice and control. Susan covered this, absolutely. We know that women are likely to have had choice and control taken away from them by perpetrators, by the services that are supposed to support them in the past, by kind of wider systemic kind of structures. So it's Housing First is wonderful. This principle 4, I think, in itself is an amazing thing and makes Housing First really, really suitable and work very well for women, giving them that agency back that they've lost or had taken. An active engagement approach is used. Proactive engagement approach to counteract mistrust of services. So Housing First workers can work flexibly, they have personal budgets, they can go that extra mile to engage women. And as we are finding in the Westminster Walk Housing First, you have to work very hard. That pre-engagement stage for women is particularly important, and that kind of trust building. Strengths, goals and aspirations as well. We know that women are seen as whole human beings with the possibility for positive change. Support offered is personal and specific to each individual, and it's being led by the woman as well. It's very important, that empowerment, giving her that power back. And a harm reduction approach is used, and we're thinking here about safety planning around violence against women and girls, as well as thinking about harm reduction around drug and alcohol and mental health and things like that. So we know that the principles align really well with kind of some of the key tenets of gender and trauma-informed practice. So we'll tell you a little bit about our service now. So it's commissioned by the local council in Westminster. It's funded by the Ministry for Housing, Communities and Local Government. The initial development of the project was done by us at Standing Together. Our role in the project is really, we got housing providers on board and we liaise and coordinate partnerships with those providers. So our housing providers are listed there in the bottom left, kind of national and local housing associations that provide units for the project, which is amazing. So we kind of coordinate that relationship and how the lettings and process works for that. And we're also in the process of evaluating the first year of the project. So the support is delivered by specialist VAW provider, Solace Women's Aid, and that's Rhiannon's side of things. And it's brilliant because I think this project, or one of the Solace's previous projects in North London, was the first time that Housing First project support had been done by a specialist women's organisation. So it's been really exciting. I'm going to hand over to Rhiannon now.
Okay, thanks, Louisa. So in the first year of the Housing First Westminster project, we had 2 staff, myself and a colleague, and now we have expanded to a team of 5. Initially, we supported 11 women from the project launch in August 2019, and we're now supporting 22 women with a workforce of 5 staff. In Westminster, around 50 women sleep rough per year, although as street homeless women are less visible than men, this is likely to be underestimated for the reasons discussed earlier about hidden homelessness and not being visible on the streets. As a specialist charity, all project workers are trained in violence against women and girls, and we offer IDFA support and more, providing holistic support with all areas of a woman's life. IDFA stands for Independent Domestic Violence Advocate, and they typically work with women who are deemed at high risk of homicide, working with them quickly to reduce risk and find safety. We offer practical and emotional support, including setting up and maintaining a tenancy, accessing health services, setting up bank accounts and applying for benefits, and accessing activities in the community, as much like a typical Housing First service. We work in partnership with different agencies and act as a single point of contact to reduce the risk of the service user being overwhelmed, decreasing agencies working in isolation and duplicating work. The paperwork we have to complete as IDVAs, such as risk assessments, safety and support plans, have been adapted to be more trauma-informed and tailored for women, work with women experiencing multiple disadvantage. For example, we focus on conversation as a priority rather than expecting women to complete several forms. So here we had some outcomes over the first year. We had a few successes. So from the first year, 8 out of 9 women who offer tenancies have been able to maintain them. All of these women had been rough sleeping for many years previously and had abandoned or struggled in supported accommodation before. This includes the first 2 women who were housed in November 2019 and have been able to maintain tenancies for over a year. And this is the first time ever living in independent accommodation. 9 women have built trusting relationships with their Housing First workers and continue to engage well. 6 who wanted support with drugs or alcohol are now engaged with drug and alcohol services. 10 women made disclosures of VAW to the Housing First worker and spoke about experiences that they had never disclosed before. And 2 women, formerly rough sleeping, are now settled in their tenancies and have started college. So we've got a case study from one of our service users who's consented to share her story. Well, I've changed her name to protect her anonymity. So Katie experienced physical and emotional abuse from family members from a young age. She was groomed by an extremely abusive older man as a young teenager. A child resulting from this abuse was removed and placed in his custody. Traumatic experiences of abuse led to substance misuse, and she's had several abusive partners since then. At the time of the referral, she was using crack and heroin heavily and rough sleeping with her dog in central London, as she had been doing for at least the last 2 years. After meeting her Housing First worker, Katie was supported to access independent accommodation and then furnish it. A few months on, Katie is completely clean, she's facilitating recovery groups, accessing psychological support, and has reunited with her cat, who's in the picture. She has recently been accepted for college to study counselling skills and has really enjoyed the course. She still has frequent visits from her Housing First worker, who is supporting her with the domestic abuse from her current partner. Ongoing support is crucial to increase safety and minimise risk. She was asked for feedback on the project. Katie says, make sure that rough sleepers can access accommodation that allows dogs, as they are great support.
I need to unmute myself. Yes, we had to do some negotiating with our housing providers about the dogs thing, but it's so important, you know, having that emotional support from an animal for the women that the project supports. So Housing First for Women, some of the key considerations that we've kind of come out of the project so far. So I said earlier, engaging women may take longer and be more difficult because women are more likely to have experienced violence and abuse across their lives. The amount of crap they have experienced is high. So engaging them and their ability to trust is low, and it can take a long time to engage women, and you sometimes have to be very creative about how you do that. So that pre-engagement period sometimes has to be a little bit longer, we found. Managing domestic abuse and violence against women and girls is a real issue. So, you know, we know that women experiencing multiple disadvantage are more likely to remain in a relationship with a perpetrator. They're not at that stage where they're ready to, or in the space in their head where they're ready to leave, ready to make decisions and think about moving on, or even identify their experience as abuse. So it's about managing the risk around that, thinking about how we can mitigate that and work with that. And it often means that Housing First workers have contact with perpetrators, and that's something that's quite new for women's specialist services, because obviously usually women's specialist services, you're just working with women, you never see the perpetrator, but in Housing First that is different. So it's about what support is there for the perpetrator. Can we link the perpetrator in with services and kind of get that really good two-pronged approach going? Supporting women as mothers is really important, maybe reuniting mothers with children that have been removed from their care where appropriate, and skilling staff up to be able to talk to women about the grief over loss of children. I think that's for Housing First workers. I was a Housing First worker many years ago, and I never knew how to do that. That need to talk about motherhood and how it has been a part of these women's lives. Housing as well. So we are so lucky with our project to have our housing providers on board and providing affordable, secure and suitable properties. Also thinking about the location of the property, the type of property, and fitting it for the needs of that woman. What is going to be safest for her? What's going to, make her feel the safest and suit her needs? And we're able to have those conversations with them about that, which is wonderful. And just in terms of barriers to scaling up, in England, so there's obviously a need for long-term funding. Engaging women with complex trauma and addressing domestic abuse and violence against women and girls takes time. Our service is funded by the MHCLG, but it's got a few different pots going, which start and finish at different times. So when we're talking about that open-ended continuous support, there really is that need for longer term funding. So we know that women are hidden homeless. So there's a real danger of focusing Housing First just for the visible rough sleeping cohort. If funding is just about rough sleepers, it will miss women. Women will be missed off those cohorts. So it's really important that we're partnering with women's specialist services and thinking about where women are. They are there, they're just not going to be as obvious. Housing First for Women, so a gender-informed approach needs to be integrated into mixed generic services. So, there's the threshold, Jigsaw Housing First, Basis Housing First in England, and a few others, wonderful dedicated services for women. But it's not just about the dedicated services, as wonderful as they are. We need to be thinking about gender within mixed services, and women within those services. And funding for Housing First should take gender into account. We know a one-size-fits-all approach to funding won't work for women. So thinking about what that looks like at funding and commissioning level too is really important. I'm going to shut up now. Thank you very much for listening.
I just want to say thank you very much for that thorough presentation from everybody. And we do have quite a few questions coming through. The first question that came through just at the start of the presentation was when it was mentioned around women that we support who perhaps don't have access to their children. What type of support do we offer to women who do have access to their children, but are looking for that safe haven?
Can I say something on this? So we've recently come across this where most of our women that we're working with have children removed, and we're supporting them to get back in contact, letterbox contacts kind of thing, as they'll go through their Housing First journey. But we recently had one woman who social services said she can have her child back. So in that case, we've worked with the housing providers and asked for a one-off case that we can offer. They can offer us a 2-bedroom property. So in that case, we've been really lucky that we have been able to flexible and continue to offer the support, so she can have her child back. Because at the end of the day, this is a permanent tenancy. I don't want to be offering anyone tenancies but they can't have children come to stay if they want. And eventually, that's my response.
Can I just add that in Glasgow, we keep that in mind as well. If a woman does have a legal access to their child, we would ensure that we applied for a 2-bedroom tenancy, so that when the child came, even if it was only 1-2 nights a week, there was a room there for them. And if that access is done legally, that's not a problem. Housing associations will accept that and give the bigger property. We would also support them to attend sometimes and maybe supervised visits, etc. So we would support them in order to achieve that and hopefully build the relationship for there.
Sorry, Liz, I don't know if you remember a way back at the beginning, we actually supported a female who had a baby. When she came to Housing First, she didn't have a baby then. We worked with her and she had a baby, and we did support her. And we supported her to move from a mother and baby unit, and she moved into her own house, and we provided the support to her. But we also attended, the child was on a supervision order, so we would attend in Scotland we'll call it the children's panel. So we would go to the children's hearings with the mum and things like that, and we would have a working relationship with the children and families. However, we were not there to support the child, we were there to support the mum, but obviously we would have a mindfulness about us to make sure that the baby was being looked after. And we done that for quite a while with that girl. Do you remember?
I think we may have time for one more question. This question here is based on partner agencies. So the question comes through asking, what partner agencies are most helpful to support homeless women? How do they contribute? And what assistance would you like to see going forward?
I think I'll start on this one. I think In terms of partner agencies, I think the women's specialist support sector. So it's mainly the women's specialist support sector in England is mainly focused around domestic abuse and other forms of violence against women and girls. But I think they are really key partners. I think there's definitely a gap between the homelessness sector and the women's specialist sector. And I think, this is something that we are starting to overcome, but I think, I would recommend, Housing First services getting in touch with your local specialist services, talking about Housing First, talking about your client group, the needs of the women you support, and seeing where you can work together. I think that's really, really key. I mean, Solace Women's Aid are a specialist women's provider. Over the years, they've really grown their services around multiple disadvantage, and now have a real specialism, I think. And I think we're really lucky to be partnered with them. But I think, for any Housing First service, I think your local women's specialist service, but be ready to kind of do that dialogue. They may not necessarily understand the needs of the women you support, I would say. Don't know what anyone else wants to say.
I'm just very aware as always that mental health services are underfunded, and I'm just chipping that in because it's it's always relevant, but always worth mentioning that if those services were better resourced, then obviously they'd be able to take more referrals. So that's always a gap.
Yeah,
Okay.
if I could just add that within Glasgow, there are various services who kind of specialise in that type of counselling for women as well. It's been very difficult, obviously, during the pandemic and through the lockdowns, but fingers crossed, and please God, they will all come back again once we're allowed out and about. But there are services there, because that trauma can be, as I say, can be hugely significant for everybody in homelessness, but with a specific focus on women.
Definitely.
Well, thank you very much for that. We are running short on time, but we do have plenty of questions here in regards to ensuring the safety of women, how can we improve recruitment, staff training, etc. So these questions can be answered after this event draws to a close. I just want to thank Rhiannon, Susan, Louisa, Avril and Elizabeth for your presentations today. The top comment we have is from Karen Green, which says, not a question, just want to say that was a fantastic presentation, and I totally agree with that. For those of you watching this, we're now going to go for a short break for 10 minutes, so please join us back at 3:40. That's 3:40 GMT, obviously. And when you return, we'll start the plenary session, which focuses on the good, the bad, and the non-negotiables. So if you do want to join us for that session, please hit refresh, and you can start that session then. Enjoy your break, and I'll see you again in 10 minutes. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.